They laughed because they thought the man in handcuffs had no power. The sound came first. Low chuckles drifting across the courtroom like smoke, followed by the sharper crack of open mockery that no one bothered to hide. Courtroom 7B of the downtown federal building in Baltimore had seen thousands of hearings, but this morning it felt less like a place of justice and more like a stage where everyone already knew their lines. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Old wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators leaning forward for entertainment. A clerk shuffled papers without looking up. Near the front, 2 officers stood beside the defense table wearing the smug stillness of men who believed the room belonged to them. Then the side door opened, and Marcus Ellington stepped inside wearing gray slacks, a dark coat, and steel cuffs around his wrists. Officer Daniel Brooks let out a laugh loud enough to bounce off the walls. "Well, look at that," he said. "Guess somebody finally ran out of places to hide." A few people smiled. Others stared straight ahead, pretending they hadn't heard. Marcus said nothing. He walked with calm, measured steps, each one unhurried, as if the cuffs were an inconvenience rather than a humiliation. His shoulders stayed level. His breathing stayed steady. He took his seat at the defense table and placed both hands in front of him. Brooks circled once, enjoying the moment. Tall, broad, polished badge gleaming under the lights. He carried himself like the courtroom was an extension of his patrol car. "You hear the charges?" Brooks asked. "Fraud. Obstruction. Must be a busy week for you." More laughter this time, softer but crueler. Marcus looked up slowly, meeting Brooks's eyes for only a second before glancing toward the wall clock above the judge's bench. 9:27 a.m. Then he looked away. That small movement should have meant nothing. Yet it unsettled the young bailiff near the door, who shifted his weight and checked the hallway behind him. Judge Harold Whitman entered moments later in a black robe pressed sharp as paper. Everyone rose except Marcus, whose cuffed hands made standing awkward. Brooks smirked at the sight. "Can't even manage respect," he muttered. The judge adjusted his glasses and Saturday be seated. His voice carried the tired impatience of a man who considered every case an interruption. He glanced down at the file. "Marcus Ellington, you are accused of interfering with an active investigation and withholding federal evidence. How do you plead?" Silence filled the room for one long beat. Marcus studied the judge, then the prosecutor, then the officers lined near the rail. Finally, he spoke in a calm, clear voice. "Before I answer, I'd like to request 3 minutes." Brooks barked a laugh. 3 minutes for what? A miracle. Even the prosecutor smiled. Judge Whitman frowned. "Request denied. Enter your plea." Marcus tilted his head slightly and checked the clock again. 9:28 a.m., "Then I'll wait," he said. The judge's jaw tightened. "That is not how this works." "Today," Marcus replied, "it is." Murmurs spread across the benches. Brooks stepped closer, enjoying the chance to perform. "You think you're special because you know big words?" he said. "You're in cuffs. That means the room already decided." Marcus turned toward him with the same unreadable calm he had worn since entering. "No," he said quietly. "It means the room is being tested." Brooks rolled his eyes and looked back at the spectators as if to invite them in on the joke. But no one laughed this time. Somewhere beyond the courtroom doors, heavy footsteps moved in perfect rhythm down the marble hallway. Marcus lifted his eyes to the clock one last time. 9:29 a.m. Then he smiled. The smile on Marcus Ellington's face was small, almost polite, but it changed the air in courtroom 7B more than shouting ever could. Officer Daniel Brooks noticed it first, and because he did not understand it, he hated it immediately. "You still think this is a game," Brooks said, stepping closer to the defense table. The chain between Marcus's cuffs gave a soft metallic sound as Marcus folded his hands. "No," Marcus answered. "Games end when the timer runs out." Judge Harold Whitman struck his gavel once, annoyed more than authoritative. "Enough. Bailiff, maintain order." Yet even as he spoke, the judge's eyes drifted toward the double doors at the rear of the courtroom. Everyone heard it now. Footsteps. Steady. Coordinated. Not hurried. Not hesitant. But precise enough to make conversation die on its own. The clerk stopped typing. A woman in the second row lowered her phone. The prosecutor cleared his throat and shuffled papers that no longer held anyone's attention. Brooks forced a laugh that sounded thinner than before. Probably late tourists looking for traffic court. Marcus checked the clock again. 9:29 and 30 seconds. You should stand straighter, he said quietly. This next part will be remembered. Brooks leaned down until he was inches away. You are in handcuffs giving advice. That is rich. Marcus did not blink. And you are wearing a badge on borrowed time. Before Brooks could answer, the doors opened. 4 men and 2 women entered in dark suits, moving with the calm focus of people who had no need to announce themselves. Their shoes echoed across the marble floor. Their eyes scanned the room once and found exactly what they came for. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with a navy folder under one arm, walked straight toward the bench. She did not glance at Brooks. She did not glance at the prosecutor. She stopped at center floor and held up federal credentials. Special Agent Sarah Cole, she said. Her voice was clear enough to reach the back wall. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Every person in the room rose halfway, then awkwardly decided whether to remain standing. Judge Whitman adjusted his robe. Agent Cole, this is highly irregular. What is irregular? She replied. Is this proceeding continuing after a direct federal hold order was sent at 8:15 this morning? She placed the folder on the clerk's desk. The clerk opened it with trembling fingers. Brooks frowned. There has to be some mistake. Sarah Cole finally turned to him. There have been several. She then faced Marcus. The room watched her expression shift from formal to respectful. Sir, apologies for the delay. Security downstairs required additional verification. Brooks laughed once, but no one joined him. Sir, he repeated. What is this? Marcus slowly stood. The chain between the cuffs hung loose now, almost decorative. This, he said, is the moment you were warned about. Sarah Cole produced a small key, stepped forward, and unlocked the cuffs with a clean metallic click that sounded louder than the judge's gavel had. Gasps rolled through the benches. The young bailiff near the door took 2 steps back. Marcus rubbed one wrist, straightened his coat, and turned toward the bench with the calm of a man returning to his own office after a minor inconvenience. Judge Whitman's face had lost all color. Mr. Ellington, he began, voice unsteady. I believe the court is owed an explanation. Marcus looked at him for a long second. No, Your Honor, he said. The court owes one. Then Sarah Cole spoke the sentence that emptied every smirk from the room. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in the presence of Director Marcus Ellington of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Silence did not fall. It collapsed. No one moved for several seconds because no one knew what movement still made sense. The courtroom had been built for certainty. Defendants stood there. Officers stood here. Judges sat above everyone. But now the old map had torn itself apart, and every person inside courtroom 7B felt it at once. Officer Daniel Brooks was the first to speak, though his voice no longer carried the easy arrogance it had worn all morning. That cannot be right. He looked from Sarah Cole to Marcus Ellington and back again, as if truth might change under repeated inspection. Director of the FBI does not walk into court in handcuffs. Marcus buttoned his coat and glanced toward the gallery where several spectators still stood frozen beside the benches. Usually, he said, they do not. Judge Harold Whitman cleared his throat twice before words arrived. Director Ellington, if this is some kind of internal demonstration, I must object to the use of this courtroom. Marcus turned toward the bench. You may object to many things today, Judge Whitman. Timing is not one of them. Sarah Cole signaled, and 2 additional agents entered carrying evidence cases. The prosecutor slowly sat down without being told. His legal pad remained open in front of him, but the pen in. His hand had stopped moving. Marcus walked to the center of the room with the calm authority he had hidden beneath silence only minutes before. For 6 months, he said, the Bureau monitored allegations tied to misconduct, evidence tampering, and coordinated intimidation connected to multiple arrests processed through this district. His words were measured, almost gentle, which made them land harder. Complaints disappeared. Recordings went missing. Witnesses changed statements after contact with officers who should never have contacted them. Brooks straightened defensively. You have no proof. Sarah Cole opened the first case and removed a stack of files secured with colored tabs. We have timestamps, bank records, deleted messages recovered from department devices, and body camera footage flagged as corrupted but preserved through automatic cloud backup. She placed the files on the clerk's desk one by one. Each thud sounded like another door closing. The clerk stared at the growing pile as though it might catch fire. Marcus looked directly at Brooks. We also have audio from this morning. Brooks blinked. What audio? Marcus touched the knot of his tie. The microphone you mistook for decoration. A ripple moved through the benches. The young bailiff covered his mouth to hide a gasp. Brooks took one uncertain step backward. You set me up. No, Marcus said. I gave you an empty room and watched what you filled it with. Judge Whitman's hand drifted toward his gavel, then stopped halfway. Director Ellington, surely there is a more appropriate private venue for these matters. Marcus held his gaze. Private rooms are how this survived so long. The judge lowered his hand. Sweat shone at his temples beneath the courtroom lights. Sarah Cole opened a second case and slid several photographs across the rail. Though no one in the gallery could see them clearly, the reaction on the prosecutor's face was enough. He removed his glasses and stared at the floor. Those were sealed, Whitman said quietly. They were hidden, Sarah replied. There is a difference. Brooks looked around for support and found none. Not from the judge. Not from the prosecutor. Not from the officers near the wall who suddenly seemed fascinated by their own shoes. The room that had laughed with him now avoided his eyes. Marcus stepped closer, not threatening, not angry, simply certain. You believed respect came from a uniform, he said. That is why you mocked anyone without one. Brooks swallowed hard. What happens now? Marcus glanced at the clock. 9:34 a.m. now, he said. The record begins. Then he nodded once to Sarah Cole, and every agent in the room moved at the same time. Agents moved with the quiet precision of people who had rehearsed every second long before anyone else knew there was a plan. One stepped beside the clerk and secured the evidence files. Another spoke softly to the court reporter, requesting an immediate certified transcript of the morning proceedings. Two more positioned themselves near the rear doors, not blocking anyone, simply reminding the room that exits and escape were no longer the same thing. Officer Daniel Brooks looked around as though someone might still rescue him from embarrassment. No one did. The judge remained seated, hands flat on the bench, staring at the wood grain like it might offer legal advice. The prosecutor had not touched his pen in several minutes. Marcus Ellington stood at center floor, composed and unreadable, the man who had entered in restraints now commanding the room without raising his voice. For the record, Sarah Cole said, addressing the court reporter, all statements made in this courtroom from 9:21 this morning forward are preserved under federal review. The reporter nodded quickly and adjusted the machine with shaking fingers. Brooks pointed toward Marcus with a hand that lacked conviction. This is retaliation because I said a few things. Marcus answered before anyone else could. No. This is accountability because you revealed what you say when you believe there are no consequences. The words settled over the benches like dust. In the second row, an older woman who had watched everything with folded arms slowly shook her head, not at Marcus, but at the officers near the wall. She had seen this before. Many in the room had. They had simply never seen it. Challenged in real time, Judge Harold Whitman finally found his voice. Director Ellington, I insist on counsel before any further action involving this court. Marcus turned toward him. You will have counsel, Judge Whitman. You will also have questions. Sarah opened another folder and removed a document marked with multiple signatures. Administrative suspension pending inquiry, she said. Immediate access restrictions to chambers records, communication logs, and sealed case archives. The judge reached for the paper, then stopped when he realized his hand was trembling. Brooks tried a different tone now, softer, almost pleading. Look, if anything I said sounded wrong, I can explain it. Marcus studied him for a moment. Men often discover new vocabulary when power changes rooms. Brooks swallowed hard. I was joking. Humiliation disguised as humor is still humiliation, Marcus said. And jokes told downward always reveal the teller. A murmur of agreement moved through the gallery. One of the officers near the wall quietly removed his own hat and held it against his chest, suddenly unwilling to be mistaken for the man beside him. Sarah Cole approached the evidence table and pressed a button on a small speaker. The room filled with clear audio from earlier that morning. Brooks's laughter. His remarks. The confidence in his voice when he believed no one important was listening. No one in the courtroom moved until the recording ended. Then the silence that followed felt heavier than the sound itself. Brooks stared at the floor. Turn it off, he said quietly. Sarah already had. Marcus looked toward the benches where ordinary citizens sat shoulder to shoulder. People called for jury duty, traffic disputes, custody hearings, small claims, and lives that could be changed by a single afternoon in a room like this. This building belongs to them, he said. Not to fear, not to arrogance, not to habit. Even the judge did not interrupt. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere outside, a siren passed on the street below, distant and ordinary. Inside, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Sarah handed Marcus one final sheet of paper. He read it once, then folded it neatly. "Officer Brooks," he said, voice calm as ever, "you are relieved of duty pending federal and internal investigation." Brooks looked up, eyes wide with the first honest expression he had worn all day. "You cannot do this over one morning." Marcus held his gaze. "You are right," he said. "No one falls this far in one morning." The words hung in the courtroom long after Marcus Ellington finished speaking. No one challenged them because too many people in the room knew they were true. Officer Daniel Brooks stood motionless near the defense table, shoulders no longer squared, badge still pinned to his chest, but already carrying the look of something that belonged to yesterday. He opened his mouth once, then closed it again when he realized excuses needed an audience, and he no longer had one. Judge Harold Whitman removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose with slow, careful fingers. The movement looked less like stress and more like a man trying to wake from a dream that had turned on him. Sarah Cole stepped beside the bench and placed a slim digital recorder near the gavel. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "we will also need archive communications involving case scheduling, off-calendar meetings, and any direct contact with arresting officers tied to dismissed complaints." The judge straightened. "You are implying misconduct without due process." Marcus answered before Sarah needed to. "No, we are preserving evidence before due process begins." In the gallery, whispers returned, but they were different now. Earlier, they had carried amusement. Now they carried recognition. Names were spoken under breath. Cases remembered. Faces recalled. A young man in the back row leaned toward his mother and quietly said, "That happened to Uncle Ray." She nodded without taking her eyes off the front. Brooks heard it. So did several officers near the wall. For the first time all morning, they understood this room was larger than itself. It held years. Marcus walked slowly toward the benches, not as a performer, but as someone addressing the people who had paid the highest price for other people's habits. "Many of you came here today for ordinary matters," he said. "Parking citations, family hearings, small disputes. But some of you came carrying something heavier. The belief that no one would listen. No one interrupted. Even the fluorescent lights seemed quieter. Today is not the end of anything," Marcus continued. "It is the first honest minute after a long dishonest clock." Sarah Cole handed documents to two agents, who moved toward the side offices connected to Chambers records. The clerk signed a receipt with an unsteady hand. The prosecutor finally stood. "Director Ellington," he said carefully, "I was not aware of any improper coordination." Marcus regarded him for a long moment. "Then you accepted outcomes without asking how they were built." The prosecutor lowered his eyes. It was not a confession, but it was close enough for the room to hear. Brooks took a step forward, voice rough. "I worked 18 years. Marcus turned. "Then you had 18 years to become better." Brooks looked as though he wanted anger back because anger had always served him. But shame had arrived first and taken the space. "People say things," Brooks muttered. "It does not mean they are who they are." Marcus nodded once. "Sometimes that is true, but patterns speak louder than moments, and records speak louder than both." Sarah placed another folder on the table. Complaints, dates, reassignments, training notes ignored, commendations issued after incidents no one had reviewed closely enough. Brooks stared at the cover without touching it. Judge Whitman's voice came smaller now. "What happens to this court?" Marcus looked toward the bench, then toward the seal mounted high behind it. "That depends on whether it wants to be respected or merely feared." The older woman in the second row began to clap once. Just once. Sharp and clear. Then she stopped, perhaps unsure if applause belonged in a courtroom. A second later someone else clapped. Then another. Soon the sound rolled across the benches, uneven but sincere. Not for spectacle. Not for power. For relief. Brooks closed his eyes. The judge remained seated and said nothing. Marcus did not smile. He simply stood there and let ordinary people make the loudest sound the room had heard all day. When it faded, he glanced at the wall clock. 9:42 a.m. "We are ahead of schedule," he said softly. Bring in the next file. The applause faded slowly, leaving behind something rarer than noise in courtroom 7B. It left belief. People who had entered expecting another routine disappointment now sat taller on the wooden benches, as if the room itself had finally remembered what it was built for. Marcus Ellington watched them for a moment before turning back to business. Next file, he repeated. Sarah Cole nodded to an agent near the side door, who returned carrying a banker's box marked with case numbers and dates spanning several years. Dust lined the cardboard edges. It looked ordinary, which made it dangerous. Sarah placed the box on the evidence table and lifted the lid. Inside were folders, flash drives, chain of custody forms, and handwritten notes clipped to dismissed complaints. Judge Harold Whitman stared at the contents with the expression of a man recognizing old decisions in a new light. "Where did you get those?" he asked quietly. Sarah did not look at him. "From storage rooms no one expected us to open." Marcus selected one folder and handed it to the clerk. "Read the name on the front." The clerk swallowed. Raymond Turner. A murmur moved through the gallery. The young man in the back row straightened immediately. His mother placed a hand over her mouth. Marcus looked toward them. Mr. Turner was arrested 2 years ago during a traffic stop. Charges were dismissed for insufficient evidence. He paused. The missing evidence was found last week in an unlabeled archive drawer. Brooks shifted uncomfortably. "That case had nothing to do with me." Sarah opened another folder. "Your badge number appears on the intake report, the supplemental statement, and the recommendation for impound fees." Brooks said nothing. The young man in the back stood slowly. "That was my uncle," he said, voice shaking. "He lost his job waiting for court. No one told him to sit down." Marcus faced him fully. "I know. He will be contacted today." The mother began to cry silently, not from grief this time, but from the strange shock of being seen after years of being ignored. The judge reached for water and missed the glass on his first attempt. "Director Ellington, this hearing cannot become a public forum." Marcus turned toward the bench. It became one the day private misconduct harmed public lives. Another folder opened. Another name. Another dismissed charge with hidden notes attached. A school bus driver suspended for 6 months. A nurse who missed licensing renewal after wrongful detention. A college student denied a scholarship interview because he spent the morning in holding instead of at the airport. No dramatic crimes. No headlines. Just ordinary people quietly pushed off course. The gallery listened in growing silence because every story sounded close enough to know. Brooks looked smaller with each page. "You are blaming me for everything wrong in the city," he said. Marcus shook his head. "No, I am holding you responsible for everything you signed." Sarah placed a tablet on the table and turned the screen toward the judge. "We also traced repeated after-hours entries into Chambers' scheduling software from unauthorized devices." Whitman's face drained again. "I never altered outcomes." "You altered opportunities," Marcus replied. "Sometimes that is where outcomes begin." The prosecutor sat rigid, eyes fixed forward, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. One of the officers near the wall removed his badge clip and set it on a ledge beside him, as though metal suddenly weighed more than it had that morning. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the courthouse windows. Inside, the room held still. Marcus looked at the banker's box, then at the people who had come for ordinary hearings and found buried truth instead. "Corruption rarely arrives like thunder," he said. "Usually it comes as paperwork, delays, laughter, and doors that only open for certain people." No one could disagree because everyone had felt one of those things before. He closed the folder in his hands and glanced once more at the clock. 9:51 a.m., "Bring in Mr. Raymond Turner," he said. "Today, some records are going to meet the people they tried to erase." Rain traced thin lines down the courthouse windows as if even the weather wanted to witness. What came next? Courtroom 7B had become too full for routine. Reporters who had heard whispers in the hallway now crowded near the rear doors with notepads in hand. Additional citizens from other courtrooms slipped quietly into empty spaces along the wall. No one wanted to miss the moment when old stories were finally called by name. Marcus Ellington remained at the center of the room, calm as ever, while Sarah Cole stepped into the hallway to escort the next witness. Officer Daniel Brooks stood near the rail, no longer guarded by confidence, only by habit. Judge Harold Whitman had stopped pretending to control the pace of events. He sat rigid behind the bench, hands folded tightly enough to whiten his knuckles. A minute later, the doors opened again. A tall man in his 50s entered wearing a navy raincoat and carrying the posture of someone who had learned to make himself smaller in rooms that never welcomed him. His hair was touched with gray. His eyes were careful, almost apologetic, as if he expected to be blamed simply for arriving. "Mr. Raymond Turner," Sarah Cole announced. The young man in the back row inhaled sharply. "Uncle Ray." Turner turned toward the sound, and for a second the years between them seemed visible in the air. He gave a small, uncertain nod to his family before looking toward Marcus. "Director Ellington," he said, voice low. "I was told I should come right away. I hope I am not in the way." Several people in the gallery lowered their heads at that sentence. Even now, after everything taken from him, the man worried about being an inconvenience. Marcus stepped forward and offered his hand. "You are exactly where you should be." Turner accepted it slowly, as though respect from authority still felt unfamiliar. Sarah placed a folder before him on the witness stand. "Please confirm the date of your arrest." Turner adjusted his glasses. "April 14th, 2 years ago." "Destination that morning?" "BWI Airport. I had a final interview for a maintenance supervisor position in Charlotte." His nephew in the back closed his eyes. He knew the rest. Marcus asked gently, "Did you possess any illegal items or stolen property that day?" "No, sir." "Were you informed why you were detained?" Turner looked toward Brooks, then away again. "I was told I matched a description." Brooks stared at the floor. Sarah opened the recovered evidence file. Items logged from your vehicle included a sealed tool bag, lunch cooler, church bulletin, and framed photo. Turner's expression tightened. "That photo was my late wife." The room fell still. Sarah continued. "No contraband. No stolen goods. No corroborating witness statement. Charges dismissed 72 days later." Turner gave a sad smile that hurt more than tears. The job was filled by then. Rent was not. His nephew stood again, unable to remain seated. "You never told us it was that bad." Turner answered without turning around. "I did not want bitterness to be the family inheritance." Even Marcus looked down for a moment after hearing that. Judge Whitman removed his glasses again, but did not speak. He knew some silences were indictments. Marcus faced the gallery. This is what corruption often looks like. Not headlines. Not sirens. A man missing an interview. A family carrying bills. Pride learning to whisper. Then he turned to Turner. "Mr. Turner, your record will be cleared immediately. Compensation review begins today, and the position you lost has already been replaced by something better." Turner frowned softly. "Sir." Sarah handed him an envelope stamped with a federal seal. Inside was an offer letter for facilities operations management at the regional FBI complex, with benefits, pension credit review, and start date pending his approval. Turner's hands shook as he read. Brooks looked up at last, stunned not by punishment, but by mercy. Tears filled the mother's eyes in the back row. Her son gripped the bench so tightly it rattled. Marcus spoke quietly enough that everyone leaned in to hear. "Justice does not only remove harm," he said. "Sometimes it restores time." Raymond Turner remained seated for several moments, reading the offer letter again and again as though the words might disappear if he blinked too long. Around him, people who had entered as strangers now watched with the tenderness of neighbors. In the back row, his nephew wiped his eyes and laughed softly through tears, the kind of laugh that comes only when pain finally loosens its grip. Marcus Ellington gave Turner time. He understood that dignity often returns quietly. Sarah Cole collected the recovered files and arranged them into new stacks labeled for review, restitution, and referral. The labels mattered. For years, the paperwork in this building had buried truth. Today, paperwork was digging it back up. Judge Harold Whitman looked older than he had an hour earlier. The confidence of the bench had drained from him, leaving only a tired man in a black robe facing consequences he once believed belonged to others. "Director Ellington," he said carefully. "If there were errors, they should have been corrected sooner. I will cooperate fully." Marcus turned toward him. "Errors are accidental. Patterns are chosen." The judge lowered his eyes. Officer Daniel Brooks stood silent beside the rail, badge removed now and resting on the evidence table where metal looked strangely powerless. He stared at it, as if wondering when it had stopped protecting him. "I never thought it would become this," he said at last. No one rushed to comfort him. Sarah answered first. "It became this long before today." Today is simply when you noticed. The reporters near the rear doors wrote furiously. Yet even they sensed the deeper story was not scandal. It was exposure. It was the ordinary machinery of disrespect finally shown under bright lights. Marcus walked slowly toward the gallery. Many people imagine corruption as secret meetings and dramatic exchanges, he said. Sometimes it is smaller. A joke no one challenges. A complaint no one reads. A delay that only happens to certain names. Heads nodded across the benches. They knew. They had lived those smaller things. The older woman from the second row rose to her feet. My grandson lost a scholarship hearing because paperwork vanished, she said. Her voice was steady. Can someone look at that too? Sarah Cole stepped forward immediately and handed her a card. Yes, ma'am. Today. Others stood after that. A veteran with a cane. A teacher clutching a folder. A mother holding traffic citations she said were written, while she was parked legally outside daycare. The line formed naturally along the side aisle. Not angry, not chaotic, just ready. Ready had been delayed for years. Marcus watched them with solemn pride. This, he said softly, is what happens when fear leaves the room. Brooks looked at the line of citizens and then at Marcus. So that is it for me. Marcus met his gaze. That depends on whether you learn the difference between being punished and being changed. Brooks swallowed. And if I cannot, then punishment is all that remains. The words were calm, but they landed harder than shouting ever could. Rain continued against the windows, steadier now, washing the city outside in silver streaks. Inside, Sarah directed agents to gather statements, scan documents, and schedule immediate follow-ups. The clerk, who had spent years looking down, now looked people in the eye as she took names. Even she seemed relieved to perform a different kind of duty. Marcus glanced once more at the wall clock. 10:07 a.m., less than an hour since the laughter began. An entire culture of certainty had unraveled in 40 minutes. He picked up Brooks's badge from the table, waited in his palm for a second, then set it back down. A badge is not honor, he said for everyone to hear. It is a promise. And promises break when the wrong hands wear them. No one in the room forgot that sentence. Not the judge, not the reporters, not Brooks, and certainly not the people now standing in line with files that had waited years to be opened. By 10:19 a.m., courtroom 7B no longer resembled the room that had greeted Marcus Ellington with laughter less than an hour earlier. The benches were filled with citizens holding folders instead of silence. Agents moved from person to person, collecting statements with patience that many had never seen from authority. Rain still brushed the windows, but inside, the air felt cleaner. Raymond Turner stood near the aisle with his nephew beside him, the federal offer letter folded carefully in his coat pocket like something sacred. He kept touching it as if to confirm it was real. Judge Harold Whitman had stepped down from the bench at Sarah Cole's request, and now sat at a side table awaiting counsel. No robe, no height, no distance. He looked smaller there, though perhaps only more accurate. Officer Daniel Brooks remained near the evidence table, hands at his sides, eyes fixed on the badge he no longer wore. For years he had used rooms like this to measure other people. Now the room was measuring him. Marcus reviewed the final summary with Sarah and signed 2 directives. Immediate external audit. Temporary reassignment of pending cases. Citizen review hotline active by noon. Efficient strokes of a pen, yet each signature shifted weight that had burdened strangers for years. Sarah handed him the last folder. Transportation is ready whenever you are, sir. Marcus nodded but did not leave. He turned instead toward the gallery one final time. Conversations softened at once. Even the reporters lowered their pens. Many people will call this a dramatic morning, he said. It was not. Drama is sudden. This was overdue. Several people smiled through tired eyes. He continued. What happened here did not begin with one officer, one judge, or one comment. It began whenever good people decided small wrongs were too small to confront. The older woman from the second row placed a hand over her heart. The veteran with the cane stood a little straighter. The mother with citations held her papers like they finally weighed less. Marcus looked toward Brooks. Mockery is easy when a person is seated lower than you. Then he looked toward the former judge. Fairness is easy when it costs nothing. Finally, he looked back to the people. Character is proven when power can misbehave and chooses not to. No one moved. Those words found every corner of the room. Brooks lifted his head slowly. Director Ellington. His voice was quiet, stripped of every sharp edge it once carried. Do people ever come back from becoming this? Marcus studied him for a long moment. Some do, he said, but only after they stop asking how to recover a title and start asking who they harmed. Brooks nodded once, eyes wet but steady. It was the first honest thing he had done all morning. Marcus then walked to the evidence table, picked up the badge, and placed it gently beside the stack of citizen complaints. Let it learn what it ignored, he said. A few people in the gallery exhaled at the same time, as if a knot had loosened across many years. Sarah opened the rear door. Daylight from the hallway spilled across the floor in a bright rectangle. Marcus took 2 steps toward it, then paused and glanced at the wall clock. 10:23 a.m., 56 minutes since the laughter began. Less than 1 hour to expose what years had hidden. He turned back once more. This building belongs to truth whenever truth is brave enough to enter. Then he walked out into the hallway with Sarah Cole beside him. No escort was needed. Behind him, citizens remained standing. Not because protocol required it, but because respect had finally returned to the room. And on the bench where authority once looked untouchable, only an empty chair remained.